So hello, I'm Colette Robbins and this is Sophie Kahn. And we are the co-hosts of File Exchange. It's a YouTube channel interview series dedicated to elevating the narratives of contemporary artists using 3D software. And we started this channel in mid-2021 after noticing a lack of in-depth virtual studio visits for artists using digital tools. As a result, we built this channel to provide a context and a space for a literal and conceptual exchange of files. Each episode features a different artist, curator, or writer who has a focus on 3D art. This channel allows you to be a fly on the wall as we share philosophies, tools, and tips revolving around these 21st century tools in art. And today, for our 11th episode, we are graced with a guest, Claudia Hart, who spent years building up a discourse around digital and physical tools in art. She has curated, educated, and mentored multiple generations of artists using new media. She was a huge inspiration for Sophie and me to expand upon all the work she started on this channel. So just kind of continuing that discourse. I am going to pass the microphone over to Sophie to properly introduce her because she has been Sophie's longtime mentor. So we are so excited to have artist Claudia Hart. So I'm going to pass it on to you, Sophie.
Yeah, welcome, Claudia. Just want to echo all that Colette said. Claudia has been a friend, mentor, and inspiration, and we've known each other for 12 years now, I want to say. And Claudia steered me through my 2 years doing my MFA at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she is a full professor in film, video, and new media. Claudia's work spans multiple outputs. She creates sculpture, performance. She's made books, right now digital paintings, immersive AR and VR installations. And I'm really excited to see the work that she's sharing with us today. So big welcome, Claudia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, ladies. So I want to start, because my story is very long. And I think what's interesting about it is that my story is the story of the medium, because I started working with this stuff 25 or 4 years ago. And so I'm a Maya user, and it wasn't Maya then. It was called, I just slipped my mind, but it was called another thing, right? And then it iterated and changed. And then other mediums, which I call virtual mediums. It was an old-fashioned tool, expression that was first used when I started working with this stuff, and now has come back because what I think it means, virtual tools, include not just 3D, but also the related platforms, augmented reality and virtual reality, and sculptural, digital sculpture, and what else is in there? Whatever.
Extended reality. Extended reality?
Well, extended reality is simply, or mixed reality is simply all of the stuff together, right? So that's one thing. And because of that, I am deeply native to it. And a lot of the way that I work, which maybe is different than if you haven't done this long, is very improvisatory. I don't need to think. Most of the time, it's like breathing to me. I don't even know what I'm doing most of the time. It's like it's a pencil. To me, as if I was, drawing, if you were good at drawing, right? So I use...
It's time to get to that point with 3D, like that probably is the 10,000 hour rule, right? Like 10,000 hours 3D modeling before it feels that natural for you.
Yes, and that's the rule of all medium.
Yeah.
Anyway, right? So as a teacher, I will tell you that it does make a difference if you start in graduate school. Kids who have been making art since they were in grade school and continue to have a certain kind of fluidity, which doesn't mean that you're a better artist or whatnot, but it does mean it's very natural to you, like breathing.
Yeah.
So part of what I do in terms of working conceptually is that that's also one of the ways that I made my mark, was that I was trying to develop, since I was showing for a dozen years in the art world before I turned to this, and I had a reputation, and I was in the contemporary art scene, and we were practicing what was called at that point intermedia. It was called intermedia. And I used to make things that were sort of like mise en scene. I worked in all media. You see where I'm going with this. That's why I went to virtual. I worked in all media, and I would have a kind of open-ended symbolic story behind it. Not like a narrative, but more like a theme. And the theme was also an area of research, and it generally had to do with history. As I was trained to be an art historian, and then I went to I have art history and art and architecture, and then I also got an architecture degree. So I, before all that, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, the education was before all that. While I was an intermediate artist, and people would come into my shows. I showed with the late Pat Hearn, and because I worked with everything, and it was like walking into a stage set, people would say to Pat, who had had great success in selling my paintings in art fairs or group shows, right? What's the art? Where does the art begin? You know, like, do I have to buy the whole show? Right. And this,
had that question.
And so I was a world builder, and that was why they were confused. It was mise en scene. It was like like theatrical. But it wasn't a theater piece where there was a narrative. It was a kind of evocative thing with research behind it, and often based on a person or a period of art or something like that. So people would say, where's the art and what do I buy? And it made it very hard to sell it. And at a certain point, when 3D was invented, and I was living in Berlin at the time, and this is a famous story that somebody threw me some tickets to Toy Story 1 in pre-release at the Berlinale, which was in 95. That's when I began, I guess. So that's how long I was doing it. So I went in there, and I had never really been to see cartoons because my mom never let me watch TV. So I never I had no feeling about animation. That's important.
You had no
for this
nostalgia
narrative.
and no kind of childhood association.
Right, zero. So I was sitting there. I just thought, well, I'll see that because it was free tickets. And I saw this thing, and I was like, holy shit, what is that? And it because I was raised in art museums, that's why my mom wouldn't let me go to see cartoons, because she had other plans in mind for me, which I fulfilled. I'm rebellious. I am. But your daughter's going to be an artist too, Sophie, as you know. So it's already started. But in any case, I looked at it and I thought, oh, that looks like Renaissance painting. I thought that looks like early Renaissance perspective constructions meet photography. I thought, that is amazing. Like, that is something different. And it was like a light bulb went on in my head, and I got very, very obsessed with must learn this and all that idea. And I was encouraged because of my problems, which go back to the intermedia problem, which was I didn't really want to make objects. I wanted to make worlds. And it's hard to sell a world when you're 28 years old or whatever. You know what I mean? Maybe now I could sell a world, and I do. Actually, I do. But it took a while. And so I took it upon myself to investigate what that was. And at that point, it wasn't, as I said, called Maya. It was called whatever. And you could
Lightwave, right?
what?
Like alias Lightwave, I think.
Yeah, or something. It was
Something
Alias.
like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
Alias.
Yeah. So, and what
did you teach yourself?
No. I first I thought I went back to New York and I looked up how you learn this.
Mm-hmm.
And there was the Center for Advanced Digital Applications, which was part of New York University. At that point, it was adult education. Now they offer a Master of Science in the special effects biz.
Oh, okay. So that was an industry.
It's an industry training thing. And
Yeah.
the guy who ran it at that point, who I don't remember, I had already had published A Child's Machiavelli, which was a fake children's book for adults, which was based on painting, and it was published and all that. And I decided that I should animate that. And I went in to this place and said, here's what I do. Here's my book. I want to come there. And he said, "Oh my God, a contemporary artist. You make them for free." Yeah.
Awesome.
So, yeah. So anyway, I did take 2 classes there.
Yeah.
And the classes at that point, it sat on a Unix computer. It was not, there were personal computers.
Yeah, but I bet they couldn't run 3D, right? It would have been a large workstation.
Yeah, it was. And then it went to personal. So I learned by going in there, and there were no tutorials or no anything. And I would go in there and say, to people, run it over to them, or actually to the lab guy who was like a graduate student in computer science at NYU. And I would run over and say, "How do you do that?" And so that's how I taught myself. And there weren't tutorials or whatnot.
What were some of the first things you built in the early Maya?
The first things I did was an attempt to animate A Child's Machiavelli.
Okay, so all right. So after the book, you then
I had the book, and I thought that's what I first thought I was going to do. Since I could draw very well and all that, I thought I would do 2D animation. But then I saw Toy Story, and I thought that's cool. And then I went back to New York, and the guy gave me free education, and I thought,
that's amazing,
I should do that. Yeah, and that opened a life up for me. It changed my life. And the reason it changed my life is that I recognized, as I was using it, the power of it, not just as a tool, but as a symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I understood about the interface, now remember, I was trained to be an architect, and so the idea that I was going to make environments, and I also felt that the tool itself resonated with me very powerfully in terms of the interface.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want
that makes so much sense? Oh yeah, like any files you want to share.
Yeah.
The architectural background, that makes so much sense in relationship to how you took to Maya and a traditional 3D package so quickly, because it's using that same kind of, some of those same thought processes that you do when you're studying architecture.
It wasn't because of that. No, because I left architecture. I mean, by nature, I'm a world builder. But the reason it did was that my area, both in art history and when I became trained in architecture, I was still always interested in history, and I was interested in the Enlightenment, and I was interested in early tools and early science. So I was a fan of Dürer, the guy.
Okay.
Melancholia.
Yes.
And I was because he could draw in a certain way that I actually taught myself to do that. And that was how significant he was for me. I was interested in visionary architects, Ledoux, Boulez. I could draw like that. I went to architecture school and I've cultivated it. And Dürer with his perspective machines and 18th century automatons. And all of this is what was my field in terms of visionary architecture of the 18th century, Dürer. And I was not interested in the real ever. I was interested in visionary architecture. I was interested in perspective machines, perception machines. I was interested in Vermeer. He was my hero.
Camera
who used
obscura.
early camera obscura photography. This is where.
Claudia, did you ever read I think it's called the like hypnerotomachia polyphilia? You might really enjoy it. I blanking on the date. I want to say it might be like 18th century, but it's
can you put it in the chat?
I will, and I'll put it
in the comments, so that everybody watching this can see it.
Extended architectural fiction kind of.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah, this would be right up your alley. I'll post the link for people too. I'll send it to you.
Well, when you curated your dream show, you were sort of playing with that.
I was, yeah. So
Sophie, see, I'm going to promote you now.
Yeah.
Like some years ago, Sophie curated an exhibit that was supposed to be within the Maya 3D. What the hell were you doing?
I'll share the screen for this. Here, just a moment.
But I didn't do it because I was too busy and I had too much gigs, but I wanted to do it because it was a great idea.
Thank you.
Oh, look, Mark was in there and Maurice
and
Jonathan.
Yeah, this was built in Unity, so it actually really, really needs to be updated. And it's really slow. I'm not going to go through the projects right now, but
Adam, they're all my students, folks. These are my children.
Yeah,
I love them. They are geniuses and they are perfect.
So the here, I'll stop the share. I'll post the link to that. But
well, anyway, that was good.
The point of that show was I invited all of these architects working in architects. Geez,
but that's interesting that you said that, right?
Freudian slip. All of these artists who work in 3D, and it was important that they did their own 3D and that they didn't outsource their 3D, because I asked them to reconstruct an architectural space that they dreamed about and leave out any figures or people. And the purpose was to reflect on the sort of futility of trying to rebuild a space from a dream. So it was important that they went through the conceptual exercise of trying to rebuild it themselves. And I was really interested in Tom McCarthy's book Remainder too. He's been a big influence on my work, and he has it's a novel about this unnamed narrator who becomes obsessed with recreating scenes from his life, and the sort of weird recursion that happens. Just reflecting on
that recursion is part of it. Yes, but recursion is significant, and also it's not to go back to what I brought up earlier about improvisatory. Like there's a difference the way you can work with these very hard high-end tools that are very skill-based. Once they become your second self, then you can improvise things like your dream space, because you don't have to go into your analytic self to use them. And that's why I mentioned that in the beginning, that and so when I teach students, even now, I don't let them do tutorials.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
they're not allowed to. That's awesome.
Yeah, they can't do tutorials. I mean, I'll demo things to them, but I will, and then I Zoom them and record them, but I'll demo riffing off their dreams, their imaginations, and I hack together skills as they need to learn to do. And I feel that tutorials turn you into a mindless robot. That's mean of
funny.
me.
I remember when I was first learning, so I learned 3D Studio Max in 2003, and there was a woman in my program who claimed that her best friend was an artist and said that like Maya had ruined her. She said she was too good at Maya. Like she learned Maya the right way, and then she felt it destroyed her as an artist because she went through this whole thing and she could do everything that Maya wanted her to do, and she had lost the capacity to like improvise. So, you know,
Well,
I'm not sure
I
if
also think it's interesting, and we talked about this on the episode with Aria as well, the difference between kind of having an open mind to different pieces of software for different projects, and then having a mastery over a tool enough that you can be into that intuitive improvisational state of mind, or that kind of stream of consciousness, because it is really difficult. I somehow did feel very early on with ZBrush, the first time in my life, I felt like with a piece of software, a type of freedom that I hadn't felt since I was a child, first discovering how to paint and draw. And so for me, that was very revelatory moving forward. But at the same time, it took me years to build up my skills in the software before I felt like I could do a more range of things. But I'm still constantly learning more and more software. And I've been studying it for 6 years now. And it's never ending. And I need some tips, because I am not sure how to teach those basic fundamentals without sharing tutorials or like in-depth demos.
Well, one of the things is that when I educate young people, I educate them to believe that failure is good. And so, you know, if you don't know what you're doing, I always tell them how jealous I am of them, because they can make these mistakes that end up making these marvelous things, like almost like reading into spilled tea leaf, you know, the tea leaf idea, like I'm trying to do whatever, and then it's like, oh, what did I do? That's interesting. And then trying to retrace your steps so you can recreate it. So I think the problem with tutorials is they're too goal oriented, and I don't want to be cruel about it, because sometimes I want to know, I can't figure it out what I want to do, and I look up on YouTube. So but I think it's a mindset. It's like glitching, that the glitch, it becomes the purpose of it, and through these eras, the meaning can also emerge. I also find that to be true in terms of research also, right? So I think I want to do something, and I do research that's historical, and then the medium itself creates problems or meaning, and I let the project evolve from my original intention. And I want to say something else about glitching, is that as this was my approach, and I had to teach myself because there were no tutorials, so I had no choice. One of the things that I understood was that the software is epistemological, that it has profound meaning. That simulation software is a philosophical interface. And
I'd love to hear you expand upon that. And do you have an image you could kind of pair with that to talk about that?
Well, I mean, I have Maya happens to be open, because
Maya.
when I was, you know, when we talked a few last hour before this, and you prompted me as to what I was supposed to do, it just so happens that it's not even just so happens, because that's what I do. And I was making from other stuff I had already made. This is what I mean, that builds on itself. So I have a commission for augmented reality dishes. And the dishes come from my world. And so I had to make a demo or a proof of concept, because this is for a virtual dinner theater. It's like the sleep no more idea, going back to what I said about improvisation and narrative that isn't actually narrative but environmental. So if you remember, see, everything's a story with me. So
That's
Yeah, and
amazing.
we'll get lost from wherever we started. But Sleep No More was a Broadway show where it was like sets, evocative sets that seemed to be emerging from very well-known kinds of theater, but not any one piece of theater, like melodrama. It was
Yeah.
a kind of melodrama, tropes, figures of speech, right? And there was also a bar and food thing. And you were in there and people were sort of performing and there were sets and all this. Some friends of mine, a couple, one of which is a Broadway producer and the other of which is a curator of experimental performance art, which most of us are using different forms of virtual reality. And who I've also worked with for quite a few years. And they came together and merged forces to make a project, which is a virtual reality sort of Sleep No More dinner theater based on virtual experience. Yes, very cool. And it's going to be on 23rd Street, Madison Square in New York, and supposed to open in April. May. And so I'm the cafe, which means they were going to have, we're going to make dishes from me that are augmented, and they will also, and sort of like dinner party, the feminist position of the dinner party. Yeah. But I am going to make these tiny still lives that are on these plates that are riffing off of famous male painters, where I sort of appropriate their languages, as I've been working with Matisse and Picasso, and paint the plates and have these little still lives, and you can see on your plate. And then we were going to have special events there where you have dinner parties, and there's an NFT element also attached, but you could buy the plates also. And so I was researching, I had to make a prototype. So I went back to another the reason they asked me is I'm one of my projects is I'm a plate lady, and I have made ceramics.
Amazing.
So I went in one of my worlds, which is called the Flower Matrix, that was based on Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland in a very general way, and from which I've done theater and experimental ballet performances using augmented reality, with which I've done experimental projection map ballet, and I did augmented fashion walk, musical. Sophie's seen like
I've been researching your work. I don't have that history with knowing you and your work, but I've been recently researching it more, and I love that connection with using those kind of patriarchal voices, and like channeling them and transforming them into something else, and then talking about the medium as, philosophically, like you're mentioning.
That's what we're coming back into. It's a whole background. So the reason why, I did this Lewis Carroll stuff, and I took the stuff from my flower matrix and said, I'll make these plates over and have still lives on them, as opposed to what I had originally had, which was a 2D animation from the Alice world. So I had them open and I made them, and I was making them, and I thought, I should, as long as I made a demo, and then I thought, well, I should rechannel all the plates and make new still lives, and it just turned into something. So I'm happy to show you those things. But before that, going back to the philosophical idea, when you called me today, I did have Maya open. So I'm going to share screen, and then we can talk about this idea of the philosophical interface. So here, see, it all comes together.
It does.
It's not just meandering. Although I like meandering. Meandering is also about making mistakes and improvising.
Isn't all discourse kind of doing that? It's like, you're kind of figuring things out as you talk.
Right. And that's where you get this. I've had fights with people who tried to make me do PowerPoints.
Screw that.
Yeah, I actually 2 times got in like a struggle with people who were
like a fist fight, or like
what?
Like a fist fight? You're a fight club for PowerPoint?
Like a power struggle with people who were very supportive recording me. You know, they wanted me to talk about my work, and they said, you have to make a PowerPoint. And I was like, oh, no, sorry, I don't do that. And then it became this like, but we must have the PowerPoint. And I was like, no. That happened 2 times. But it's the same idea, right? Where the improvisation itself is what makes it alive and less boring. So I hope I'm not boring you. So here's the Maya that I had open. That's my dish, and that's what you would see through your augmented app, which is a little still. But the reason I want to do this is let's talk about Maya as a philosophical interface, because the insight that I had when I was starting even with this stuff, there's the 4 of you, is that Maya was an epistemological software. What does that mean? That means that here's the menu, modeling, right? In Maya, there's a number of menus. Let's just start there. And each of these menus, modeling, rigging, animation, effects, rendering, and whatever, customizing. These used to have different names. This was called, was it called particles, or was it called physics, or they were all called many things. They keep changing it. It's very irritating. So all of these like stand for a different branch of human knowledge in the sciences. And the interfaces of them actually use the scientific terms, which is why when you first use it, you think, what? Because it's, you know, all of the language seems very alien in the beginning because they're actually scientific terms, and the numbers you type into them have to do with the real world numbers of real physical things.
Well, it's just like the 3D space itself being based on the Cartesian, you know,
it's based on many different sciences. Yeah.
Right.
And each one of those, that's why it creates uncanny objects.
Right.
Because it is both real and unreal at the same time. You can make a fantastical image, which is either totally abstract, or in this little guy that I have open here is a fantasy, you know, here's the plate.
Oh, nice.
You look at the plate and you see that little cute thing and it casts a shadow, right? And here's another plate. I have 5 different motifs. They come out of my flower matrix world. I'm not going to show them all to you now. But going back to this, each of these interfaces are based on real numbers that come from nature.
Yeah.
So if we're in here now, yes, the modeling menu is based on calculus and geometry and topography.
Yeah.
These are real sciences. And if you go into the menus and look at them, the surfaces, for example, are these are algorithmic, geometric algorithms.
Yeah.
Right.
That actually, if you made these things, if you found these forms, these fractals in nature, they would obey like a wave. They would obey, the numbers come from nature.
Yes.
Waves are like this. So in here, for example, if you do these, where are they? If you do these, which ones? I'm looking in the deformers. Okay, so if you go in the deformers and you do the nonlinear deformers, let's just tear it out, right? So you have a wave and a twist and a squash and a sine and whatever. Like the wave comes from algorithms for waves. And use the same terminology, right? So if I put a wave deformer on here, you will see that amplitude, wavelength, drop off, and all this is also the terms that are for actual oceans, right?
Yeah.
And the mathematics and algorithms way back in the olden days came from studying those real things, and then they become algorithms, and they're used for prediction and everything else, right? But all this stuff comes from actual natural world, and so I'm going to see out of that. So this interface modeling, the interesting part is for me the topographical part, which has to do with mapping and science of topography, like when you surveil nature as a surveyor, right? And then if you go into all the other ones, rigging is kinesthesiology, right? Which is actually based on human motion. So inverse kinematics is about creating systems to reverse, to create the natural moment. Even though we do this, right? But our head thinks, our brain, the way our brain works is it shortcuts. It says, I'm going to put my hand on my head. So even though the hip, the joint, we don't think the hip bone's connected to the thigh bone. And I rotate my shoulder and my elbow, right? So inverse kinematics in Maya is a found mechanism in order to translate what the brain actually does, where the hand drags. But it's based on the human skeleton and the way the human body actually works and natural studies.
Yeah.
Going down through everything in here, FX is what we used to call physics.
Yeah.
So whether it's particles or light.
Physics simulations,
Rendering is lenses and light and the way light bounces off of materials.
Yeah.
And rendering is also the physics of material science.
Yeah.
If you look at
I was like amazed when I would do a kind of physically correct render, with light that was correct according to the laws of physics. And because in the rendering window, you actually don't see some of the things that your brain corrects for, it looked unreal, even though it was completely physically correct. Like if you render a red cube in a white room, and I would demo this for my students, you'd have the red color bleed right up the wall. There'd be like red, bouncing off that cube onto the white wall, and our eyes kind of filter that out. And in Maya, it's revealed. And, there are times when you have to ask the light to not behave according to the laws of physics to get closer to what our perception is used to seeing, because the real actually looks artificial.
It's not that it's real, Sophie, it's that it's perfect.
Yeah.
So, what happens in
Maya
is that's why it's uncanny, because we're using models. We are using the algorithms. The algorithms are perfect. The surfaces are perfect. They're flat. There are no flaws in them. But in real life, it doesn't bounce in the same way because surfaces are broken and irregular and not perfectly consistent and all of that. So the reason why you can make these uncanny spaces within the land of 3D is that you can have the laws of nature and physics. The algorithms that were culled from big data and generations of knowledge that started with the Enlightenment scientists that I idealized, we have accumulated knowledge of human knowledge. That's why it's epistemological, the nature of knowledge, is that, and that the entire history of our scientific knowledge is used in this thing, so that we can reverse engineer a model of the real within a perfect airtight space with no gravity and no light.
Yeah.
When we do have light, we have the perfect light that's based on modeling the physics of light, which is never perfect except in outer space. I always tell my students there's no blackness. There's no
Yeah.
perfect dark on Earth, only outer space. But in Maya, you start from perfect dark. So in order to counteract the perfection of the mathematical model, which itself has been culled from big data, a humankind's lifetime of accumulated scientific knowledge, we then reverse back to make fantastical worlds, imaginary worlds that have the aura of the real, because they're based on real data, big data, which we can then manipulate for expressive purposes and then make them unreal in the way we don't want them to be real, you know? So
then what does that mean as an artist or a maker using those tools with that history and that reflection? It's like, I mean, how do we, like, you know, what does that mean as a medium? And I think that's an interesting question, just that artists are thinking about as they're using these tools. I'd love to see the flowers in that scene. Can you zoom into those for us to see? And how do you go about?
Oh, these.
It looks like it looks like you've got like a table, a floor, and then some flowers.
Oh,
and
that
then they're
flowers
all
was based on a famous painting by Henri Latour.
Oh, the tour.
Which was called The Bouquet of Henri Latour. And it happens to hang in the Art Institute Museum.
Yeah.
Where I happen to teach. And so me and my students, we have used that as trackables for augmented. And I made a sculpture with this. So I happen to have the model hanging around. I'll show you the sculpture.
Oh yeah, great.
So, here, help. Here, this is, whoa! This is a life of its own. That's from what's going on? It's acting up. So if you, what are we doing? Oh, so here. So I actually, so I was invited to Anderson Ranch, which is
that's gorgeous.
which is in Aspen. And they have a smart lab.
Yeah.
And with the smart lab, I thought, oh, goody, I can make finally a bigger sculpture, which I'd never done. I'd made printed things, Sophie. Sophie was my student, and she brought things that I had just toyed with into a practice so rich and so great. And that's why we're so bonded, you know. But yes, because of that list that you curated were all of my students who I'm very, very bonded with, because we created, when I was teaching all this stuff, it was so new, but I wanted to do it in an art way. And I would say, I have an imagination that we could do this with it. I've never done it. You guys figure it out.
Yeah.
And then they would, and many of them made it into their art practices. With me, I was just like, made them as demos in my classes and never returned to them because I'm not a single skill person. I'm a theater person.
Yeah.
Creating worlds. So it doesn't matter.
I love that you do these world building. And I want to ask more specifically a couple of things. I mean, on this channel, we do get a little nerdy because that's kind of more our audience in terms of like what specific tools we're using and materials. Like, for example, like how did you prep that file and is it 3D printed or was it CNC
this
milled?
Thing, the sculpture? Yeah, so what I did was that in fact, that little model in there, let me pull this aside. This little thing, which I rechanneled as an augment, let's put it into wireframe. This little thing, ooh, ouch, that's very bright. All right, so this thing was actually my prep for the sculpture.
Oh, okay.
That's the prep.
Right.
So what I did was I made airtights, and the airtights. So I made a model of the Henri Lafitte Latour using Maya's whatever it's
Solidify
called.
or extrude.
No, 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 no. I'm more tricky than that.
You
I
too.
don't, I definitely try to avoid massive amounts of work when I can. So, wait, how did I do that? Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I used the 3D paint tool.
Oh, okay.
And then I
Oh.
custom designed the flowers, you know, by manipulating the not the 3D paint tool. I use Paint Effects.
Paint
Right?
effects, yes.
So where the hell's Paint Effects? Wait, which model is it in? Is it in modeling? Yeah,
Oh.
generate. So here I use Paint Effects, which is on
down in the middle.
yeah. So here's Paint Effects, flowers, more flowers.
Ah.
So I will take a flower that's
Right.
generic, such as this guy and that guy is that guy.
Ah, right. Okay.
Right?
No, thank you. That's so fun to see. That is like one of the most exciting things for me to see is like just like the components that build each artist's world.
Yeah.
Right. So
because,
in this one, my play was Henri Matisse, and I wanted to make an animation that was like it's just a minute going by and the clock ticks in real time. And I made the noises, so those are algorithmic noises that I produced because he used this is my fake Henri Matisse augmented wallpaper.
Yeah.
Where I freehanded by looking at a Matisse, right? And then made these are my trackables for my wallpaper. But when I made the animation, I wanted to do a parallel construction, not copy Matisse. So if I was an artist today and was Matisse, which I am, I would make not little drawings of leaves, but in fact, organic noises. So I did. You know, but then I also, my other game was Matisse was flat. He was a 2D artist. So how can I deform my Maya XYZ space into flatness? And that's how I get this weird spaces because I actually don't use rectilinearity. I use the back wall. I sort of like that, you know, I make it
orthographic.
I take everything off orthographic.
Yeah.
Right. Ah, okay. That's
it's like the
that
flattened, like almost
so
like one point
it's not
perspective.
real, ladies. It ain't real. And that's what I want to tell you all as I tell my students.
Yeah.
The hell with this hyperrealism, folks. It ain't real. The good part is you can cheat. And cheat away. Cheat your little hearts out. Because that's what it's about. It's about faking it. Faking. Everything's fake. It's simulated. It's a model of the real that uses physics culled from the real world and then uses it expressively. So in order to make these, I took flowers. I don't know which ones, but I distorted them so much by going into their menus and changed them so that they looked more like the Henri Lafitte Latours. And I added gravity to them and I did all that. And then I made them have bulk and to them because my plan was I was going to make a sculpture out of it. And I wanted to use natural materials, but make them appear as if they were whittled and made by hand, but purely simulated. So I then took those flowers that I had taken from Paint Effects, customized, took out, deleted the history. Brought them into Mesh Mixer. Oh, wait, corrected them, deleted the history, brought them into Mesh Mixer and shrink wrapped them. I knew that I was going to make the petals and flowers out of printed resin, and I was going to CNC these out of rough wood. I airtighted the stems and the blossoms separately. They're all airtight. I faked the table which was from as close as I could get to the Henri Lafitte-Latour table, but I didn't model it. No. I mean, do you know how much work I do all the time? And I do it all myself. So like if I can cheat, I cheat. And so I got the table from
like Purpose Squid
Warehouse or whatnot.
Yeah.
Because it was a historic table.
Yeah.
And I took it back. That stuff is real crap. I mean, very irregular because they use it in that other software, SketchUp, which is like its system is very irrational and not what we do, and it's just a big pain. And so I took it, I regularized it, I shrunk wrap it in Mesh Mixer, I made the vase because it's easy, and then I shrunk wrap it together with the table because I knew I wanted it to seem like one thing when I actually CNC'd it. So this was all CNC'd, and these were CNC'd out of walnut, and you can see them here when you see what actually happened with the thing. So these, do we have a tighter shot?
Are those photographs from the actual physical installation?
Yeah, that's a Bitform show.
Okay.
So
so
there
this was made in one piece, the vase and the table.
I love this piece.
Yeah.
And then I made these out of the walnut, and I just used I'd never used the tools when I got to Anderson Ranch, but they taught me how to use the tools, and I'm like an old girl, so I've been doing this so long, I can do it pretty quick. And then but I used like very rough bit in the router, so that it had that hand carved feeling. And then I printed the resin of the flowers. And I put gravity on the flowers when they were simulated within Maya. Yeah. And then and I whitewashed it. Yeah. And then the resin flowers are just what they are. I sanded the hell out of them. That was the worst part.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
Yeah. I thought after this, that's the end. Like Steve, when I made this, Steve said, you should make more of those. And I was like, no.
I mean, I think this is absolutely stunning. I don't think I saw an up close of this, and I love it. I love hearing more about your interest in the theater and like the theatrical nature of doing these installations and AR pieces. And this is just the playing with that, like that reality or that unreality that happens in Maya, and bringing that to the physical space somehow, and kind of drawing that not parallel, but almost like a dialogue between the two spaces is really amazing. And I think
well, that's what I started. Example. Thank you. And I'm honored by your thinking it's amazing. But I will say that this idea of this uncanny theatrical space is what I've been doing since I was a girl. That's what led me to here. Mm-hmm. I wanted to do that. I didn't want real. I wanted a theatrical real. Or I wanted, when I was a little girl and I grew up in New York, like Sophie's children, it's dangerous. And my mom had artistic plans for me, like Sophie does with her poor little girls. And she would take me to have lessons at the Brooklyn Museum. And then she would drop me off at the Met, where I could wander around for 3 hours. In those days, there was not danger or people in the Met. Nobody went. Wow. Yeah, so I could like go, and then my mom would pick me up, and I thought, I love this. You know what I mean? It was like, I want to live here. And so I wanted to do that. And when Maya came along, and it was such a pain when the humans in the art world would say, what's the art?
I was actually just about to bring that up as we're kind of going towards the end here, is because I think something that you've done, and you've inspired me, and I know a lot of other artists who are talking about the way you've inspired them and mentored them, is this idea of kind of declaring space in the art world and saying that, you know, like kind of pushing back against like this. I mean, I personally, as somebody who comes from a painting background, feels like I'm not digital enough for the digital community. I'm in the NFT world. I'm not NFT enough for that community. I'm not enough of a purist traditional artist or painter in the painting community. So there's all these hierarchies that people live by and declare about in their own practices and kind of project upon other people.
They're kind of turf wars, right? They stake
right,
out
turf wars. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of that in academia. I mean, I've been told by professors that I teach with that what I teach, teaching 3D modeling, is ruining the world, and how dare I? And so there's like,
I've lived that.
Oh, I know. I mean, you have paved the way, but it's still going on. And so I think that this channel, the audience for this channel, a lot of teachers are showing their students these videos and trying to kind of show the narratives of the artists themselves, like that direct, you know, hearing from those artists. So I think it would be really helpful for you to talk about too, for our audience, just about that experience of pushing back and kind of some advice or thoughts about kind of how to go about as we journey into this kind of, I think you were using the words in one of your statement about this new moment where NFTs have really seized our attention. If that makes, I know I'm
okay. I'll talk
so.
about it. But Chamber of Dreams, the reason I'm bringing it in and we'll have it going is just to open up this discussion of intermedia, and then I'll go into this. So Chamber of Dreams is a heading on my website, a category of Mozilla Hub spaces that I've made, and so here I'm just gonna show the two relevant to what we were talking about, and then we'll go into the one of that show. All right, so this is the flower matrix. I just want to tell you because the flowers and the dishes. So there, you know, I made a hubs with the same environment and the same model. So I reiterated, but it's not just reiterated, it's about this kind of world building. And the hubs became, I turned off the sound in here because it's so noisy. I'm an audiovisual artist and my audio is a big deal. So yeah, it's too loud. But the other thing I did was for Ars Electronica, and this is directly related to what we're saying, is so that show that I was showing you pictures of, I was invited, they wanted to have a remote outpost of 2 years ago when the COVID first hit in Ars Electronica. So I built a model of that. And of that, instead of doing video, I said, let's do hubs. And hubs was not so familiar at that point. See, look, there's the same sculpture.
Yes. It's so rewarding to see a different iteration of it too in this space, that it's not the like exact thing, but it's like spatially you're kind of getting that uncanny connection.
Yeah, so that's the uncanniness. But I want to go back to talk about this idea of pushing back and all that. Look, there's a link to another one. So anyway, when I built this room during the during the first phase of the COVID, right? The first quarantine, I built the space and everybody was quarantined. And so I had, and nobody had anything to do. So I built this space.
I remember those were the days.
Yeah. So I thought I would invite people, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
To do studio visits from all over. And I did get to have some colleagues in there from my school and people who had always been horribly unsupportive and competitive or just plain condescending because of territory, or maybe they didn't really understand what we were talking about. It was COVID and everybody was stuck inside, and that also changed everything for all of us. So I invited colleagues who, you know, had been sort of not very supportive to come here. And because they understood that the world had come to a halt, that everything had changed. And at the same time, NFT were introduced, which did not turn out as utopian as I had originally hoped for.
Yes.
But I think I love, Colette, that you have taken upon yourself with some of my other young friends to educate and bring the word about what we do to people in the NFT space who they call us trad art. But it's basically
art school art, I've been called.
Right. All right. So it is. And art school art does also include art numérique, which is the throbbing, pulsing geometric thing. So, haha. We're just bigger than that. And I think the idea of educating people is very, very important. So I love that you and Mark are doing that, Colette. And I think it's important work.
We're also doing,
what, dear?
I was going to say, we're also doing something that I think you've been doing for, a really long time, which is we're helping lift each other up. We're helping. And that's what Sophie and I do together when we collaborate and when we do this channel together. And we started it during COVID, is that, we need each other. We don't operate in a vacuum. We all need to be present.
It takes a village.
It does. Yeah. It's not.
But also that's what makes life meaningful.
I agree.
And that's why we're so bad at business, because we enjoy ourselves so much doing that.
I have that same feeling. It's like my motivation is I get to connect and I get to have interesting conversations with people, and I get to see people see my work in a room and kind of get excited about it and talk about where it takes them and what it makes them think of. And, I'm not profit driven, and I haven't made bank on NFTs. I haven't kind of had that desire to hustle.
But it's also about so I think the thing about artists is we're very idealistic, and we do it for community, and we do it for the conversation, and we generally do it because we went into a museum when we were little kids and fell in love. And my experience is not so different. And we never once thought about money, and then we found ourselves in the world. So, but the reason I'm showing this is that when I did this, Asher, with whom I'm doing the dish project, at a certain point, I was like, Asher, I think I spend 12 hours, I spend 5 hours a day giving tours. Can you help me monetize this? Enough already. But the reason why people were so interested is that I was bringing people who were not familiar, and their defenses were down because of what had happened with COVID and everything else. And we had these conversations within this space where they were coming in as little flying, robots or talking plants. Or whatever.
It takes the sting out of that interaction with it when you're all just these strange avatars. It somehow levels the playing field, so to speak.
Yes. Exactly. So, going back to resistance, it's also about meeting and talking. That's why I bring up the fact that Colette is very involved in going into Twitter and meeting people and talking to them about what us digital artists are doing. And the same thing happened with me at the beginning of COVID, when you talk about fellow academics, etc., who I had always met resistance from. And then there was all this, and everybody needed to do something. And so they said, what the hell, will meet Hart in her crazy thing. And then they all had so much fun laughing and being talking plants and crazy, whatever, and it was magical. And so that was the beginning of a change for those of us in this culture that I have been involved in for 25 years, that the rest of the world, on many levels, including the NFT space, which is people from the advertising or currency worlds and speculation and all this, or academics who previously thought, well, they're not video and they're not photography, and so we have to guard that because we are the experimental artists. What are they doing? I don't know what they're talking about. That's why they got so tough on you, because they were like, what the hell is she talking about? And instead of saying, excuse me, little girl, can you please explain what you're talking about? I don't understand. They're like, oh, it's all bullshit. So, because grown-ups don't like to say, I actually don't understand what you're saying.
Oh,
I
once
think
had a
that's so
photographer-
important to say, I don't understand. And this is why I feel like just somebody who didn't come from a digital background and then jumping into it later in life, like in my 30s, like, I think it was good. It was humbling because I became the complete beginner's brain around all of these like masters and experts, and that feeling of humbleness, like of understanding that I have so much to learn. I think we all have so much to learn still. I mean, I do every day. I mean, I have things to offer, but I also have a lot to learn.
Yeah, and I think, people involved in experimental practice, we like that. We like learning the new stuff, and so we're a sort of subset of people. So, but even with people who want to know that, Colette, like the younger kids, when I'm teaching them how to glitch and make mistakes, it's like learning a new language. If you want to learn to speak French or Italian or anything and you're 40, it's really hard, partially because of your brain reifying and not being as flexible, but also because it's embarrassing to be dumb when you're a grown-up. And when you want to enter these, to be able to improvise with 3D or high-end softwares that are very complicated to learn, you have to be willing to make mistakes and just stomp around and screw everything up. And that's where you can be creative. And
right.
So,
I mean, Claudia, I feel like, oh, sorry.
No, that's it.
That I think that's something that you and I have talked about a lot. Like, I think you remember saying something to the effect of like your students kept you young, but I think like I love that. And I do think about that because something that I've like continually admired with your practice is that it has you're investigating some of the same territory, but you continue to experiment and branch out and work into kind of different forms and new forms. And even over the past 10 years, the work looks enormously different, and I think that a lot of artists hit on a brand, they hit on something that works, and then they get afraid to try, they hear about AR or VR, they hear about something else and they kind of shy away from it because it sounds kind of too new and scary. And I think in your work, Claudia, you've almost embraced the opposite. You've really investigated emerging technologies as they emerge. And I think that's, it takes a level of openness and a level of not being afraid to make mistakes. That's hard. It's uncomfortable.
It's really
hard.
It's
not just emerging. I'm interested in very specific things, which are simulation technologies. So, I mean, I started with simulation.
Aegis, like under that
the difference is like when I got involved, like I wasn't into internet. My imagination was seized by simulations technology due to my background, due to my, I liked Durr and all this. And it was a good time to get into it because it was still nascent. And, like everyone my age did internet art. Nobody cared about what I was doing, and it made me not part of that group, because my age group was doing another thing. But because of my weird historical and every other art background, I wanted to do that. And it was a good time because it has been developing and and speeded up now. So, I've tracked my medium as my medium has expanded into from the most primitive kind of 3D with renders and all that, where high def was literally 640, by 420, and to now I'm just with my medium because I was so in love with the idea of the epistemological philosophical nature of simulations. That I fell in love with that as I had with a certain kind of art like Durr and Vermeer when I was a kid. And I just have stayed on that track as it has flourished. I mean, I use the web, I'm particularly now because we have web AR and web VR and we have NFT, which is also in my mind an expansion of the space of simulation, the simulated real. So that's why it was appealing to me, not because of the money. Although
No.
it has helped me because the spillover, meaning the interest in what we do, has poured out into all of us and what we do. And I've done NFT projects and I've sold them. I mean, I'm not the guy that's hanging out on Twitter or whatever because I'm super busy. And the reason I'm super busy is that the spillover from NFT has been good to me.
Yeah. Well, I think we try to keep our interviews around an hour, so we might need to
Well, that's
wrap
it.
up
We did
shortly.
We did it. I mean, I'm really excited. I think people are going to be really happy to hear your perspectives on this and your background, because there's so much more there's a lot more attention to practices like yours right now, which I think is good. I mean, like, I think that's something that we should have been, like history should have been looking at earlier, or critics and curators, but it seems like somehow this like attention frenzy that's happening because of NFTs is putting the light back on something that was already there and has been very rich and nuanced for years. But it's just adding a set of highlights onto, or headlights onto that area in a way that I'm just glad that the traditional art world is kind of expanding a little bit in that sense. I think that is exciting. I think you said to me last time I saw you in an opening that it's
your opening.
No,
it was at
it was a Postmasters.
Yeah.
And it was, you said something that really stuck with me. It was about how that it's that not the NFTs themselves or what they are or the definition of them, but rather the like excitement and this kind of newness and this like kind of new energy that's happening because of it, that is kind of shaken the art world, or kind of had a ripple effect in the art world, or at least in the discourse. Maybe it's not going to do anything. I don't know. Maybe it's all the same stuff, but just with a different name tag. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. I'm still exploring and learning.
I don't know if it's all the same, because
I don't know.
When I try to talk to regular art people, it's still not that easy, you know?
Oh, okay. No,
I mean, you can do more simple things for them, but the idea of what I do, which is so reflective on the nature of simulations itself, it's reflexive and reflective. I seizing on the idea of simulations as a mind model. Now, how do you explain that to somebody
who's never like cracked open Maya in their life, and never,
not just Maya, who's not like coming from that culture, which means gamers understand it, young people who have come through gaming or whatever, it's second nature to them. But unless that's the case, and that's probably why many NFT collectors who are in the crypto space, young financial guys, usually they're guys, are, get it because they're gamers.
That's like the air they breathe.
Yeah, they're gamers.
They're gamers.
Like if I say simulations, they're not like,
oh no, they get it. They get it. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's still, the art people can look at the iconography of what I do and the iconology, but the reflective part about the model, the paradigm of the model based on big data, how we take information, big data information, which then ends up about nature, which ends up making a tool that makes a simulated uncanny nature because it's based on big data, is so rich and so profound, but not really something that the normal people get. The regular folks who,
Well, thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Claudia. This was amazing. That was a good point to end on too.